Привіт, I'm Chuck Olinik, and in the SCA, I'm known as Yaroslav the Persistent, though most people call me Yari. Now, one of the things that I've been doing, part of it was developing my persona, but then it turned into a rabbit hole, is I've been digging through the folklore and folk tales told in different Eastern and Central European countries. And the reason I do this is these are the types of tales that would have been told by a campfire or sitting by the peach, the big oven that would warm the house. And these were the tales that Kobzari, the wandering minstrels, would tell or sing of. And even though a lot of these stories were collected in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, they've got to be far older. So you'll also see, as I tell these tales, there's similarities. You know, there may be name changes, but there's similarities in the various tales. Well, this one is a Serbian tale, and it was collected by a Vuk Karadžić. And it's real similar to the Brothers Grimm, The Crystal Orb. So, in the lands of the Serbs, there's a tale of a dying king who had 3 sons and 3 daughters. On his deathbed, he made his sons swear an oath that they would marry off their sisters to the first person who asked. And the 2 older brothers swore to this, although they felt that this was the madness that comes of deathbed requests. But the youngest, who was called least of 3, he took the oath seriously. But one night there was a booming voice from the forest that demanded that one sister be given to him. And the 2 older brothers were reluctant, but least of 3 heeded his late father's wishes and handed over his eldest sister to the voice. The next night, another voice called from the forest, and least of 3 handed over his second oldest sister. And on the 3rd night, there was another voice, and least of 3 delivered his youngest sister to this voice. Long did the brothers debate after their sisters were gone of what to do, until finally they decided to go in search of their sisters to see what became of them. Well, throughout their travels, the 3 brothers braved many perils. They faced great serpents with many heads. The least of 3 tossed one serpent into the lake, and in doing so, he put out the fire, which washed away the kindling, the wood, even their strikers and flint. The 2 older brothers were beside themselves with fury. Least of 3 was told, go alone to find some means to build a fire. As he searched, least of 3 came across 9 giants that were terrorizing an area, whom he defeated using his keen wits. In doing so, he freed the captives the giants were keeping in their village, and one of the captives was a princess, whom the other captives bid he take as his bride. Least of 3 brought his new bride to her castle, and it was here that he decided to live. He was allowed to visit any of the rooms in the castle, but the princess warned him of a room whose door was bound with heavy chains and locks that looked most imposing. Never open that door, husband mine, ever. Well, the princess was away from the castle for a time, and least of three, consumed by curiosity, at last got past the imposing chains and locks and entered the dimly lit room. Inside, he came across a man bound in chains. "Who are you?" In a croaking voice, the man answered, "I am Baš Čelik." "Who are you, boy?" "I'm no boy. I am called least of three. I am the prince." "Ah, so you are the husband of my captor. Then I pray you, give me water. I thirst so, and have not spoken in so long." And least of three filled a mug with water, which the chained man gulped down, watching his host carefully. "You feel different, don't you, Prince?" "Why, yes, I feel ever so much stronger. There's so much vigor in my limbs. That's because I've given you an extra life for your kindness. I pray you, give me more water." Least of three gave him another glass and felt even more life flow into him. And then Baš Čelik asked for a third glass, which granted the prince yet another life. But as the prince was gaining lives, the muscles of Baš Čelik began to swell. Old muscles regained their strength, and he broke the chains binding him. He stood, and now least of three saw wings open, and Baš Čelik flew from the forbidden chamber through the palace. As ill fortune would have it, the princess was returning at that moment, and Baš Čelik flew away with her in his arms. Now least of three, Prince least of three, set out to rescue his princess. On the way, he learned that his sisters were married to the lords of dragons, of hawks, of eagles. He visited their castles and was welcomed by his sisters and their husbands. But when he told each lord of his plans to defeat Baš Čelik, they sought to dissuade their brother-in-law that this was sheer folly. The young prince refused to listen. So each lord, at the bidding of his wife, gave least of three a magical feather that when burned would summon their armies. Prince least of three tried to rescue his wife, but each time he failed, and he felt a life leave him. On the fourth time he failed again and died, but not before he burned the feathers. And his body was saved by his brothers-in-law, who arrived with their hosts, and they resurrected him with the waters of death and of life. At this point, the princess learned that Baš Čelik could not be killed by any ordinary means. He carried his life in a bird that was in the heart of a fox in a forest on a high mountain. Well, then the lords of dragons and hawks and eagles sent forth their hosts. The dragons could not find the fox in the forest. They were too large to fly amongst the trees. And it wasn't an easy task for the eagles to do so. But the hawks, with their keen sight, found the strange fox, who carried in its heart a bird, which in turn carried the life of Baš Čelik. And they led Prince to Baš Čelik, or Baš Čelik killed him by killing the bird which was inside the fox. And least of three rescued his bride, the princess. But no one really knows what happened to his brothers. It was at the feast I heard this tale, there it was I drank mead ale. Though it flowed down my beard, my mouth stayed dry, for never a drop passed my lips, swear I.